My father never yelled. Not when I wrecked the family car at 17. Not when I told him I wasn't moving back home after college. Not even when I quietly stopped showing up for the Sunday night dinners that were more tradition than joy. His way was silence, and I had learned, sometimes too well, how to respond in kind. So when the letter arrived that spring afternoon, tucked between an electric bill and a grocery flyer, I knew before opening it that it wasn't a birthday card. His handwriting hadn't changed, angular and deliberate. The envelope was plain. No return address. Just my name. I stood in the hallway outside my loft, turning it over twice before sliding a thumb beneath the flap. Inside, a single sheet. A single line. Don't try coming to the family reunion. No love, Dad. No explanation. Just the absence of everything that used to be unspoken. I stared at the sentence a moment longer, then folded the letter in half and slid it back into the envelope. There was no sting, no outburst. Just a soft exhale and the quiet click of my front door closing behind me. I tossed the envelope on the kitchen counter, next to a half-full mug of cold coffee. My phone buzzed on the table, some calendar reminder I didn't care about. I picked it up, opened my messages, and typed a reply I knew he'd never read. Understood. That was all. That was always all. The light through my kitchen window was gold and drifting. The air smelled faintly of wet pavement and something sweet from the bakery across the street. I stood there for a beat too long, then moved to the worn desk in the corner of my loft. The laptop opened with a mechanical hum, the screen glowing to life like it hadn't slept properly either. I clicked through a few folders, muscle memory guiding me through old files I hadn't touched in months. I logged into the bank account first, out of habit. The cosigner page took a second to load. But there it was, like always. My name, Aubrey J. Morrison, cosigner. Loan amount, $2,500,000. Status, active. They never removed me. All those years, all that silence, and they still hadn't taken me off the hook. Not legally. Not financially. My father had cut me out of family barbecues and Christmas phone calls, but not the loan he opened when I was 24 and too eager to prove I could be trusted. I'd asked twice. Once in person. Once in writing. No answer either time. That loan was for the business. A legacy for your brother, he'd said. Funny how I was never part of that legacy, just the collateral. I leaned back in the chair, letting the weight of it settle like dust. Outside, someone was whistling. It sounded like a song I half remembered from childhood, played on the radio during long summer drives when we still went places together. I didn't feel anger. Not anymore. I felt calibrated. Like all the missing pieces had finally settled into place, ugly and unmoving. The screensaver flicked on, casting shadows across the hardwood floor. I moved the mouse and clicked open a folder I hadn't dared touch since the last time things fell apart. It used to be called Shadow Ledger. Back when I still believed there might be a trail to follow, an audit to force, a confrontation to win. Now it had a new name. Redemption Plan. A breath caught in my throat, but I didn't flinch. The first file opened without protest. Some debts were never paid in money. Some legacies were never signed away. And some stories don't begin at the family reunion. They begin the moment you're told not to come home. My father didn't raise children. He raised replacements. That was the phrase that echoed through the halls of our family home, whispered more often in the offices of his business than in the warmth of our dinner room. It wasn't something he said directly to me, no. Everett had a way of speaking in mottos and slogans, and you were meant to understand your place within them. We don't hire outsiders, we raise them. That was his favorite, a creed he repeated endlessly to employees and, unfortunately, to his own children. I remember those words as clearly as I remember the chill of the garage in our suburban Boise home when I was 12 years old. While my older brother, Dylan, was off at soccer camp, I was locked inside, hunched over spreadsheets that tracked tire inventories. I barely knew what half the numbers meant, but I learned to input them flawlessly because that was expected of me. My tasks were practical, invisible, and utterly replaceable. At 16, while my peers were out enjoying spring break, Dylan was lauded for his vision at home and at the family business. Meanwhile, I was managing payroll quietly, with no praise or recognition. I was the shadow that kept the wheels turning, the background hum to their bright ideas. I didn't complain. I was too busy being invisible. Our dinners were a performance. Everett dominated the room with his presence, a man whose words carried the weight of expectation and the coldness of judgment. He praised Dylan's ideas, the ones that promised growth and innovation, while casting me in the role of my reliable one. But reliability, in his eyes, meant obedience and silence, not leadership or creativity. I still remember the night I overheard him speaking to a supplier. His voice was low but clear. "My son will take over. The girls just support." Those words didn't break me. They chipped away slowly, layering doubt and resignation. They whispered that my value was secondary, that my dreams were just background noise to someone else's ambitions. That night, I sat at my desk and quietly tore out the last page of my business notebook. It was titled, "What I Do Differently, a List of Hopes and Plans I Never Dared to Share." Folding the torn page carefully, I hid it away. It was a secret rebellion, small but significant. Growing up under Everett's gaze was to learn the art of invisibility. It wasn't about cruelty or shouting. It was about subtle exclusion, about being shaped to fit a role that wasn't mine. My mother, Marlene, was often passive, smoothing edges, but never challenging him. She was caught in her own silence, a quiet witness to the hierarchy that defined our family. This chapter of my life wasn't marked by dramatic confrontations, but by a slow, relentless conditioning. I was the backup, the reliable one, the replacement, not the heir. And I learned to accept it because resisting meant being erased completely. But beneath the surface, something was growing, a quiet strength born from the very shadows I lived in. The kind of strength that doesn't shout, but waits for the right moment to speak. And that moment was still far away. The summer evening air was heavy with the scent of fresh asphalt and new beginnings as I stepped into the sleek boardroom of Madsen Automotive. The room gleamed with polished wood and glass, a symbol of the expansion my efforts had helped bring to life. It was impressive, yes, but beneath the shine, there was a coldness I couldn't shake. The usual hum of business conversations was absent. Instead, an uneasy silence filled the space as I took my seat at the long table. My father, Everett, sat at the head, his posture rigid and unyielding. Dylan was there too, his attention barely on the room, fingers idly tapping his phone. There was no warm greeting, no explanation, no pitch. Just a neat stack of papers and a pen, already uncapped, slid across the table toward me. Everett spoke, his voice measured and commanding. "The bank requires a co-signer with impeccable credit. Dylan's over-leveraged. I won't risk personal assets. You're the only one with a clean slate." I glanced at Dylan, who shrugged without meeting my eyes. The expectation hung thick in the air. No one asked if I wanted to say yes. No one said thank you. My mother's words echoed softly in my mind. "Don't expect gratitude. Your father shows respect with trust, not thank yous." It was the closest thing I had to reassurance. I hesitated, only for a moment, then signed the papers. The pen's scratch against the paper felt heavier than I expected. This signature was meant to be my foothold, my way back into the family's inner circle. But no one acknowledged the moment. No smiles, no nods, no glance of appreciation. Just the cold continuation of business. As I rose from the table, my eyes caught the office wall where Dylan's photo hung proudly under the label, Incoming CEO. I looked for my own but found nothing. Not a single picture. Not a single sign that I belonged. I left the room carrying more than signed papers. I carried the weight of invisibility disguised as obligation. That night, I lay awake wondering when I'd become the support and never the successor. When my loyalty became just a footnote in a story I wasn't allowed to tell. The pen scratch was loud in my ears, a reminder that sometimes the hardest signatures are the ones you make without applause. There was always one empty chair in the conference room. Mine. Even when I was sitting in it. The gathering felt more like a lecture than a meeting, rows of sleek black chairs facing a long, polished table beneath fluorescent lights. I slipped into the third seat from the end, directly across from Dylan, whose attention was already fixed on his phone. The new leather upholstery still smelled faintly of plastic. It was paid for with the very loan I'd signed my name to. Funny how that worked. When I was 10, I'd asked my father why my name wasn't on my own birthday cake. He'd smiled and said, "Space constraints." At the time, I'd laughed it off. Now, in the sterile hush of Madsen HQ, I recognized the same polite excuse. Polite, but profoundly excluding. Hank Delaney, our company accountant, perched at the head of the table. His tie was slightly crooked, as if he'd rushed here straight from an earlier crisis. Everett's heavy footsteps announced him next, no greeting, just the confident thunk of his briefcase hitting the table. "First order of business," Everett began, voice calm but firm. "Our system upgrade is nearly complete. You'll notice restricted access until the rollout finishes." Hank nodded as if reading from a script. "You'll receive credentials by next week. Temporary." His eyes flicked to me briefly, then away. That was the moment I realized I couldn't see the budget dashboard I'd used every quarter for the last 5 years. No chart, no graphs, just an error message. Access restricted. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, a cold knot that promised frustration rather than fear. My fingers itched to tap through the menus, to correct a number, to fix a discrepancy. Instead, I sat still as pages flipped and slides advanced, relegated to silence. Then I noticed it, a vendor charge that caught my eye before anyone mentioned it. $12,000, listed 3 times in consecutive months under Premium Analytics. I raised my hand, voice even. "Hank, could you clarify that line item? It seems duplicated." Dylan leaned back, smirk curling his lips. "That's just Mark's testing fund. He's a friend of mine. Great rates." He didn't meet my gaze. Everett turned his head slowly. "Focus on bigger things, Aubrey. Don't act like an outsider." The word landed like ice. Outsider. I remembered the last time I'd been called that in the boardroom when I questioned a vendor fee. Then I was the one who asked. Now I was the one admonished. I felt the room swell with an unspoken truth. I had never really been inside. The rest of the meeting blurred. Figures and forecasts echoed off the walls, but I tuned them out, watching the empty chair at the head of the table that I had vacated in all but name. Silence filled that space more than any voice could. When the meeting adjourned, I lingered behind under the pretense of gathering notes. Once the last colleague's footsteps faded, I opened my laptop at a small side table in the corner. The fluorescent glare bounced off the screen as I searched old reports, the very folder I was locked out of. My privilege as co-signer hadn't extended to ceremonial oversight. I found the backup drive in my bag, an unremarkable silver flash drive labeled for later. I slid it into the USB port and watched my old files populate the directory. Expense spreadsheets, vendor contracts, email exchanges, the hidden ledger of every time my brother or father had rerouted funds in my name. Every instance they'd used my clean reputation without permission. I copied 3 years of data, every detail I'd tracked for audits, onto the drive. Progress bars inched forward, and with each one, I felt a recalibration inside me, from obedient to watchful. I didn't hide the drive afterward. Instead, I placed it on the ledge behind the desk in my loft, where I could see it every morning. Back in the lobby, I passed Dylan and Everett on my way out. They were catching up, laughing about something. An old promotional video flickered on the flat screen near the elevators, showing a family portrait, them, smiling under a banner that read Madsen Reunion, 2018. My face was there, pressed between theirs, but my eyes looked away. Riding the elevator down, I thought of that empty chair again, a constant reminder of a space I'd occupied but never owned. Outside, the midday sun hit the parking lot, warming the asphalt where the company fleet was parked. A breeze carried the faint scent of pine and lawn fertilizer from a nearby park, reminders of a world beyond spreadsheets and boardroom politics. At the car, I paused and looked back at the building, glass windows reflecting the sky, promising transparency that I knew was an illusion. The engine's rumble sounded too loud in my ears, but it soothed me all the same. That night, I plugged the flash drive into my home computer. I didn't need to open the files again. I knew what they contained. Instead, I formatted a new folder, TruthSafe, and moved a copy of every file into it. The old drive I locked away back on my desk was safe, but this copy was my assurance that I had the power to reveal or protect, to trust or to withhold. I closed the laptop lid, heart steadying. The world inside Madsen Automotive had tried to erase me, my seat, my screens, my significance. But I had not erased myself. And if they ever needed me again on their terms, I would be ready, with all the proof they'd tried to bury. Don't worry, Hank had said over the phone that Friday. It's all temporary. But temporary has a habit of becoming permanent. I flipped open my laptop on a late September Sunday morning, the air in my Eugene loft cool against the warmth of a freshly brewed chamomile tea. A golden haze from the low autumn sun played on the hardwood floorboards. Outside, a single red maple leaf drifted past the window and landed on the sill, a quiet reminder that things change whether you want them to or not. I'd spent the past hour organizing paperwork, bank statements, credit summaries, and old vendor invoices I kept in a tidy stack. My plan was simple: review the numbers, compare them, and make sure everything still added up correctly. After years of being the invisible one, I needed certainty. I double-clicked the PDF labeled September Credit Summary and scrolled down to the line items. Most months, the charges were predictable: utilities, a few subscription services, my monthly rent. But this time, I nearly choked on my tea when I saw the entry, consulting services, $40,000. Next to it, a name I barely recognized, Lily Prescott Consulting, the kind of mid-sized firm you'd hire for marketing tests, except I hadn't hired anyone. And the same charge appeared 3 times over the last quarter, each tagged to a different project code. I stared at the screen for a moment, heart thumping. My mind raced back to Hank's last email. System glitches, Aubrey. Consult with Dylan on any discrepancies. He handles the newer contracts. Dylan. As if I hadn't handled everything quietly for years. I closed the PDF and dialed Hank Delaney's direct line. The phone rang twice before he answered, voice bright as if he were chatting over coffee instead of troubleshooting a potential fraud. Hey, Aubrey. How's Sunday? Fine, I said, resisting the urge to hang up and call back with better manners. Can you explain these consulting charges? $40,000 to one vendor seems unusual. There was a pause long enough for me to imagine him gathering excuses. Yes. That's part of Dylan's pilot program. We're testing targeted social outreach. Lily Prescott's the consultant. It's temporary. She's just getting us set up. I pressed on. Except Lily Prescott's website says she specializes in nonprofit fundraising. Different industry. And I don't see any metrics or proposals in my folder. Hank laughed. I don't have the details on hand. Dylan's been spearheading that initiative. What's the hurry? I told you, it's temporary. The new dashboards go live next week. You'll have all the data then. That's a long temporary, I said softly. I hung up before he could deflect again, the line clicking dead. I sat back in my chair, tea gone cold, and stared at the screen. The consulting charges lit up my mind, the silence in my loft suddenly too loud. I hadn't realized how numb I'd become, clicking approve on spreadsheets, trusting that someone else would tell me what I needed to know. But now it felt like a trap. I opened my file explorer and navigated to Shadow Ledger, no, Redemption Plan, and then another hidden folder labeled Backup Q1, Q3. Inside were copies of every invoice and internal memo I'd downloaded when I first noticed things were off. I clicked consulting_files_20xx CSV and watched the list appear. Vendor names, dollar amounts, project codes. Lily Prescott Consulting showed up with 3 entries totaling exactly $40,000, no notes, no signatures besides a scanned image of my initials. My palms went sweaty. I opened the image of the approval form and zoomed in on the signature line, Aubrey J. Morrison. Only it wasn't mine. The loops in the letters were too smooth, the angles wrong. I knew my handwriting, thank you notes, grocery lists, the address I'd signed on loan documents, but this was a forgery. I slapped my hand on the desk and took a deep breath. Something shifted in me. The calm acceptance I'd cultivated like armor now cracked. I was no longer content to be the silent cog in their machine. I wasn't asking for gratitude. I wanted accountability. I thumbed through my contacts and found Rachel Morey's number. My heart pounded as I dialed her cell. She picked up on the second ring, her tone steady. Aubrey, Sunday calls? Everything okay? I swallowed. I need to know what happens if a cosigner walks away. She sighed on the other end. Let's talk. Now. I closed my laptop, rose from my desk, and braced myself for the next step. The accountant's lie had become permanent only because I let it. It was time to unmake it and make them answer for every forged signature and hidden dollar. You don't need to scream, Rachel said, voice low and firm across the small oak table. Just move the brick holding their wall together. Her words settled in the warm hush of the coffee shop, soft amber light bouncing off the wooden panels, the murmur of quiet conversations, the faint hiss of the espresso machine behind us. I stared at Rachel Morey, my old friend from law school turned fierce advocate for anyone feeling trapped. Across from me, she spread a manila folder labeled Redemption Plan open like a blueprint. She leaned forward. They've been building without your permission. Start pulling pieces. We were in Boise's historic courthouse district, a block from the courthouse steps where Everett had once preened for local press. It felt poetic to face him here, in neutral territory, planning my departure. For years, I'd carried that folder unopened, hiding it under files marked Backup Q1, Q3. Today, with Rachel's help, I was ready to read it. Chapter Objective: to discover that legal freedom is possible and to begin dismantling the structure that relied on me. Setting: a cozy downtown coffee shop near the Ada County Courthouse. Dark-stained wood tables, leather armchairs, local art on the walls, soft jazz playing overhead. Patrons whispered over cappuccinos. The scent of fresh roasted beans hung in the air. Characters: Aubrey, narrator determined, cautious, quietly reclaiming power. Rachel Morey, confident, precise, a steady guide through legal complexities. We opened the folder together. The first page was my withdrawal letter, typed, formatted, ready for signature. Rachel had drafted it months ago, tucked away until I decided to act. "Read it," she said. I scanned the text. I, Aubrey J. Morrison, hereby withdraw my cosigner status from all financial instruments held by Madsen Automotive, including but not limited to the commercial expansion loan executed in 20XX. I affirm that I relinquish any legal or financial obligations associated with said instruments and request immediate acknowledgement from the banking institution. I looked up. "I did this months ago?" I asked softly. Rachel nodded. "We prepared it in case the moment came. And it's here." I flipped to the next page, a checklist of next steps: submit to the bank, notify regulators if needed, secure personal records. Beneath it was a section titled Potential Outcomes. Bullet points ranged from loan restructuring to internal review. I traced my finger down the list: bank freezes account, internal audit, possible renegotiation without my name. Suddenly, the coffee shop felt smaller. This wasn't just paperwork. It was a demolition order. Rachel closed the folder gently. "You don't have to fight them. Just stop holding them up." Her words echoed my own thoughts, the burden I'd carried so long. Plot progression. Rachel confirms I'm not legally bound as guarantor, only as co-signer, and can withdraw. We review the withdrawal letter, line by line, ensuring it covers every obligation. Rachel walks me through the timeline: submission, banking response, audit initiation. She reminds me that once the bank acknowledges receipt, I'm no longer on the hook. We paused over a latte, Rachel insisting I have something warm in my hands. Outside, leaves drifted in autumn breezes, a reminder that every season changes. She slid me a copy of a state regulation sheet, Idaho statutes on commercial loans and co-signers. "Here," she said, pointing to a clause, "you'll see the bank has 30 days to process your withdrawal. If they stall, we escalate to the state auditor." I nodded, absorbing every word. The plan was laid out, a series of small, precise moves. Silence fell between us. I watched a barista pour steamed milk into a cup, foam swirling like storm clouds. I thought of all the times I'd watched others take credit for my work, my name printed on contracts I never read. All because I believed loyalty meant sacrifice. I took the folder labeled Redemption Plan and read the last page again, my withdrawal form, signed with my own hand. That moment felt sacred, the culmination of every quiet frustration I'd felt in boardrooms and back offices. My chest tightened in a way I recognized not as fear but as resolve. I'd moved my first brick. That night, I placed the folder on my desk in Eugene and whispered, "I'm done being useful." Everything after would unfold on my terms, from the courthouse district of Boise to the quiet sanctuary of my loft. The wall was beginning to crumble, brick by brick. All that remained was to step back and let it fall. It took less than 5 minutes to undo years of silence. I sat in the dim glow of my loft, the overhead lamp off and only my laptop lighting the room. Outside, Eugene's night sounds drifted in, a distant car engine, a lone bark of a neighborhood dog, while inside, I braced myself for a quiet act of rebellion. I opened my browser to the bank's online portal and entered my credentials. The page loaded my name alongside the $2.5 million expansion loan I had co-signed years ago. A single button stood out, Remove Cosigner. My finger hovered over it, heart pounding as memories of that first signature flashed through my mind, the pen scratch on paper, the absence of acknowledgement. I clicked Remove Cosigner, and the screen refreshed almost instantly. Cosigner status updated. Processing pending compliance review. No alarms, no fanfare, just the gentle hum of the laptop. Without pausing, I navigated to the document upload section and attached the withdrawal letter Rachel and I had drafted months earlier. I hit submit, then opened the report misuse form. Carefully, I summarized the unauthorized consulting fees, forged signatures, and the names involved, attaching the scanned evidence. Another confirmation appeared. Your report has been received and forwarded to our compliance division. I leaned back and took a deep breath. The quiet in my loft felt charged with possibility. I thumbed my phone screen and sent a quick text to Jillian Ortiz, my personal accountant, removed my name and filed the report. Confirm no personal liability. Within seconds she replied, checked. Legally clear. No further action needed. I stood, stretching sore shoulders, and then returned to my desk to find an email from Keith, the bank's loan manager. The subject line was stark, operating account update. My pulse quickened as I opened it. The message informed me that Madsen Automotive's operating account had been frozen pending an internal review, effective immediately. Their lifeline into daily operations stuttered to a halt, all because I had chosen to move one brick. I didn't celebrate. Instead, I turned my phone face down and silenced it. By morning, it would buzz dozens of times with voicemails and frantic texts, but tonight, I welcomed the peace. I closed my laptop and let the hush wash over me. In those 5 minutes, I reclaimed control, not with fireworks or drama, but with a single, deliberate click. The next morning, a new chapter would begin, one written on my own terms. There was a chair waiting for me at the reunion. I didn't sit in it. Leona's was unchanged, right down to its weathered brick walls and battered wooden tables where the ceiling fans clacked gently overhead. It smelled of garlic bread and simmering tomato sauce, comforting and familiar. In my pocket was a sealed envelope. In my heart, the quiet certainty that nothing here would change for me. I slipped through the front door 15 minutes late, dressed in charcoal slacks and a simple blouse, neutral, unreadable, unprovocative. A server glanced up and nodded toward a long table by the back wall, for chairs on one side, one conspicuously empty at the head, positioned directly across from the fireplace. That was mine. It was as if they still believed I would come. My brother Dylan was already there, phone in hand, watching someone text him. My mother, Marlene, sat beside him, her posture stiff but her eyes tracking the door. At the far end sat my father, Everett, shoulders broad, face composed. His gaze locked on me the moment I stepped in, though he said nothing. I took the empty chair's place only long enough to open my envelope, then set it on the table and backed away. The papery crackle caught their attention. Dylan was the first to speak, voice sharp enough to slice through the low chatter of other diners. "You're late, and we see where your priorities lie." He jabbed a finger at the envelope. Destroying the family legacy was more important than a simple reunion? Everett rose, tall, imposing, the image I'd carried in my mind since childhood. But today, he looked tired, worn at the edges. His tone was softer than I'd heard in years. "Aubrey," he said, arms open as if welcoming me home. "We can fix this. We can talk." I walked to the table, each step measured, and placed the envelope squarely in front of him. "This confirms my legal disassociation from Madsen Automotive," I said evenly. "Also included is a copy of the anonymous audit report filed with the state." I sat in the chair opposite him, hands folded in my lap, as I had so many times in boardrooms, only this time I was facing the issue directly. There was a moment of stunned silence. The glow from the nearby sconces caught in the tears that Marlene hurriedly blinked away. Dylan's jaw clenched. Everett reached for the envelope, but hesitated. "You sent me that letter," I continued softly, telling me not to come. "I'm just agreeing with it." Everett's eyes drifted to the document, then back to mine. His voice cracked, unfamiliar in its vulnerability. "Please," he whispered, one word, laden with years of regret and failed attempts at connection. I watched him for a moment, not with triumph, but with the compassion I'd buried long ago. "I'm not here for forgiveness," I said. "I'm here to be clear." I stood, unfastening the chair's back. "You told me to stay away. I've honored that. Now, please let me live." I turned to leave. In the doorway, I paused and looked back once. Marlene's lips trembled. Dylan's face was pale. Everett's eyes held something like apology. Then I walked out into the April air, warm with budding possibilities. Outside, the fading hiss of traffic and the smell of magnolia blossoms greeted me. My steps felt lighter than they had in years. I walked to my car without looking at the empty chair again, because I no longer needed to see it. It was theirs. I was finally beyond its shadow. By the time I reached my loft, a breeze had stilled the blossoms along my street. I leaned against the door, closed it behind me, and exhaled deeply. On my desk, the redemption plan folder lay open, its papers neatly in place. I slid the withdrawal letter into its final section, closed the folder, and clicked it shut. No normal reunion would ever feel the same. But for the first time, I felt complete. And in the quiet hush of my home, that was more than enough. They wanted silence. I gave it to them. This time, it wasn't submission, it was strategy. Sunday afternoon light filtered through the sheer curtains of my loft, casting soft patterns on the hardwood floor. Normally, the quiet would have felt comforting, a reprieve from the rush of deadlines and obligations. Today, it felt like a stage set for chaos. My phone lay face down. On the coffee table, its screen dark, but I could see the corner of it twitching with notifications I refused to acknowledge. I sank into the overstuffed armchair, hands folded in my lap, and resisted the urge to check the glowing icon. Nearly 30 missed calls. 40 unread texts. The voicemail indicator pulsed like a warning light. I took a slow breath, reminding myself of the choice I'd made. Not to run from them, but to make them chase. Finally, curiosity trumped aversion. I flipped the phone over and tapped the voicemail icon. The first message was from Hank Delaney, his voice urgent and clipped. "Aubrey, this is Hank at the bank. We need you. The loan's in default. We can't move forward without your signature or guidance. Please call back ASAP." My lips curved into a small, detached smile. They needed me, but not on their terms. The next message was from my father. His tone was colder, edged with something like shame or anger. I couldn't tell which. You've ruined the family legacy, Aubrey. Do you even understand what you've done? Call me. I felt a flutter, not of guilt, but of satisfaction. For once, his silence had been broken by necessity. My mother's voicemail followed. Her voice trembled so much I had to lean forward to catch the words. Sweetheart, please talk to your father. He's not sleeping. He thinks you can still help. I closed my eyes and recalled her gentle smile at the cafe, the way she tucked a plate of scones into my hand. Guilt tugged for a moment, but I remembered the layers of disappointment she'd buried in her voice over the years. Another message lit up the screen. Dylan, terse in text. Loans collapsing. Snap out of it, sis. I ignored it, swiping left to delete. Then there were messages from half a dozen colleagues, frantic emails, a text from a distant cousin. I deleted those too, one by one, like cutting frayed threads from a garment. When I reached the 10th deletion, I paused. This wasn't carelessness. It was choice. I tapped through until only Hank's message remained, the one where he begged for help. I forwarded it to Rachel, adding no note. She'd know what to do. The phone buzzed again, an incoming text from an unknown number numbered 6. But I didn't check it. Instead, I stood and walked to the open window. The street below was dotted with maple trees, their leaves flickering in the afternoon breeze. I poured a cup of herbal tea from the kettle on the stove, inhaling the steam's soft, chamomile sweetness. Balancing the mug in my hands, I leaned out and felt the sun warm my face. The city moved on below, cars cruising, neighbors strolling, life unfolding without regard for my family's turmoil. My chest felt lighter, as if letting the messages pile up in silence had lifted a weight. Behind me, the voicemail icon blinked insistently, but I remained still, sipping my tea. Another notification flashed on the screen. Then another. The only sound was the whisper of wind and the soft hum of distant traffic. I let the phone vibrate on the table, my resolve unshaken. They wanted silence. I gave it to them. But this time, I was the one in control. The truth doesn't need to knock down the door. Sometimes it slips through a digital portal, and signed and undeniable. I arrived at Rachel's law office on Monday morning just as the sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps. The reception area smelled of fresh coffee and polished wood, and muted conversations drifted behind frosted glass doors. Rachel greeted me with a steady smile and led me to her private office, where afternoon light pulled on a dark wood desk strewn with manila folders stamped confidential. She moved with quiet confidence, arranging the materials in neat piles, detailed fraud reports, vendor invoices marked with inconsistencies, and bank access logs that tracked my cosigner removal and the freeze on Madsen Automotive's operating account. Sitting across from her, I took a moment to breathe in the calm hush of the space. No harsh lights, no shouting, just the low hum of an office that understood procedure was its own form of power. Rachel tapped an invoice, pointing to 3 identical $40,000 entries to a shell consultancy I'd never authorized. I felt the familiar knot in my chest, the one that used to tighten when my concerns were brushed aside. Today, it propelled me forward. She guided me through the documents one by one, confirming that every attachment was properly labeled and dated, the withdrawal letter I had filed, the forged signature scans, the email exchanges with Hank Delaney at the bank. With each click of the scanner, each inhaled confirmation, the weight of uncertainty lifted. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about accountability. Next, we opened the Idaho Business Ethics portal on her laptop. A simple blue and white web form appeared, fields for my name, the company's name, a description of misuse, and an area to upload supporting documents. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I typed my details. Aubrey J. Morrison, Madsen Automotive. Unauthorized use of cosigner status, forged signatures, and misappropriated consulting fees totaling $120,000. I paused, thinking of the quiet afternoons I'd spent troubleshooting spreadsheets I didn't own. This description felt like setting a bird free after years of captivity. I clicked to upload the scanned folder of PDFs, fraud report binders, invoice discrepancy logs, and the bank data showing the account freeze. The progress bar inched forward steadily, each segment a confirmation of truth laid bare. When every file had uploaded, I glanced up at Rachel. Her expression was unreadable but kind, as if she knew exactly how significant this felt. I clicked submit, and the page refreshed to display in bold letters. Submission received. Case under review. No dramatic fanfare, no gavel slamming, just a silent acknowledgement that the wheels of justice had been set in motion. The hush in Rachel's office suddenly felt powerful, like the calm before a tide. We closed the laptop and sat back. Rachel's voice was soft when she spoke. You're not fighting anymore. You're just letting the facts speak. Those words settled over me like a benediction. I had spent years learning to keep my head down and my mouth shut. Now it felt as if every suppressed question and ignored spreadsheet had united into an undeniable testimony. Outside, I could hear the courthouse clock begin its slow chime. The morning rush edged into a lull, and the scent of toasted bagels from a nearby bakery wafted through my window. For the first time since this all began, I felt neither fear nor anger, but a deep, steady calm. I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and saw a string of notifications, emails from Hank, voicemails from my family, texts from Dylan. Instead of answering, I locked the screen and slipped the phone into my bag. Rachel stood and slid a copy of my submission into the folder marked legal record. She handed it to me with a nod. Keep this close, she said. It's your shield now. I thanked her, gathering my things, noting the quiet confidence that exuded from her office, proof that authority needn't be loud. As I stepped out onto the courthouse steps, the late morning sun felt warmer, the breeze gentler. I paused at the top of the stairs, looking back at the building where so many battles had been fought in hushed corridors. I raised my chin, imagining the digital portal I'd just traversed acting like a silent broadcast to anyone listening. Today, I wasn't invisible anymore. I had chosen restraint over rage, facts over fury. And in that choice, I had discovered a power quieter and more enduring than any shout. Freedom doesn't look like applause. It looks like quiet mornings and no one asking for your help. Late morning sunlight drifted through the tall windows of my Eugene loft, dancing across the worn oak floorboards. The space felt impossibly larger now that it no longer held the weight of looming deadlines and unspoken expectations. The drawer labeled for later stood empty, a testament to burdens filed in digital folders rather than carried on my shoulders. I brewed a simple breakfast, 2 slices of whole grain toast and a soft-boiled egg, every movement deliberate and unhurried. A crackle from the vintage radio announced the start of a classical jazz station, Bill Evans floating through the room. I poured a cup of chamomile tea and slid onto the couch, letting the music wash over me. My phone lay face down on the coffee table, its silent presence a comfort. For once, there was nothing pressing to check. A gentle knock came at the door. I opened it to find Mrs. Truitt, my elderly neighbor from 2 floors down. Her hair was silver, pulled into a loose bun, her eyes crinkled with warmth. She held 2 steaming mugs balanced on a small tray. "Good morning, Aubrey," she said, her voice soft as lavender. "I thought you might like company and coffee. Would you join me on the porch?" I smiled and followed her to her apartment's small balcony overlooking a courtyard strewn with potted plants. We settled into wicker chairs etched with decades of use. She handed me a mug. The scent of fresh roasted beans mingled with the faint perfume of her lavender dress. "I heard about the news," she began, eyes gentle. "You've been busy." I nodded, cradling the mug as warmth seeped into my hands. "Quietly," I said. She studied me for a moment, then offered a knowing smile. "Loss shapes us differently, but sometimes it opens a door we never knew was there." I listened as she spoke of her late husband's garden, of summers spent coaxing foxgloves to bloom, of neighbors brought together by simple kindness. Her stories felt like roots, anchoring me to something beyond spreadsheets and boardrooms. I realized how long it had been since I'd experienced ordinary human connection without agenda. When I returned to my loft an hour later, an email notification blinked on my phone. I picked it up, half expecting a new crisis. Instead, it was a payment confirmation from one of my clients, a small women-led startup I'd agreed to consult for months ago. The subject line: "Read. Thank you, Aubrey. Payment received." I tapped it open. There it was, my first invoice, paid in full, with a note: "Appreciate your guidance. Looking forward to next steps." No hidden clauses, no veiled expectations, just honest gratitude. I set the phone aside and gazed out the open window. The scent of jasmine drifted in, carried by a faint breeze. I thought of how I'd used to shut this window tight during storms, both literal and metaphorical, afraid of what might seep inside. Now I welcomed the air. I stretched out on the couch, the sunlight warming my face, and closed my eyes. The jazz continued softly, blending with the distant laughter of neighbors below. For the first time in years, I fell asleep on the couch without a single worry to chase away. I woke to the soft buzzing of my phone on silent mode. Blinking against the lingering warmth of sleep, I reached over and picked it up. A single voicemail notification glowed on the screen from my mother's number. I pressed play, half dreading her voice yet drawn to it. "Hello, sweetheart," she began, voice tremulous. "Your father isn't well. If you want to see him, don't wait too long." The line crackled with emotion she seldom allowed herself to show. I held the phone to my chest, letting her words settle. The sun had moved higher in the sky, and the room was brighter now, full of possibility. I knew what I had to do next. Decide whether to cross that threshold again, not out of obligation, but on my own terms. Outside my window, leaves fluttered in the gentle breeze, and a new chapter beckoned, one where quiet mornings were the true measure of freedom. I drove all the way there, parked outside the house. But I never rang the doorbell. The cul-de-sac was silent beneath a canopy of cherry blossoms, their pale petals drifting like snowflakes across the asphalt. The neighborhood felt frozen in late spring, each brick-faced home standing guard over its own memories. I sat in the driver's seat, hands resting lightly on the steering wheel, and stared at the house where I had learned obedience before I learned my own worth. Brick veneer, white-trimmed windows, a single-car garage, nothing had changed except the weight of every unspoken word. At 12, I'd asked my father why my name wasn't on my birthday cake. He'd said, "Be grateful your father built something for us." I'd smiled then, not understanding how that sweetness masked exclusion. Now, sitting here, I wondered, who was that legacy really built for? My phone buzzed on the passenger seat, yanking me back to the present. I glanced at my mother's name and answered before the voicemail could claim the call. Mom? Sweetheart, Marlene began, her voice trembling the way it did when she was about to ask a favor she thought you might refuse. He's not sleeping. Your father asked for you this morning. He won't say it outright, but I think he hopes you'll come. The house's darkened blinds seemed even more impenetrable. I remembered the dinners. When I'd sat at the table, seconds away from asking for my plate, only to catch my father's gaze and swallow the question. I'd learned early that silence could be more punishing than any harsh word. I took a slow breath. Mom, I said softly, he never called me when he needed me before. There was a pause longer than I expected. I know, she whispered. But this time, he's different. You'd know if you saw him. He misses you. I closed my eyes, listening to the faint chirp of a robin in the yard behind me. Spring was in full swing, but I felt none of its renewal. All I felt was the tug of old obligations and the sharp edge of freedom waiting just beyond my front seat. I needed him to see me when I was there, I replied at last, voice steady. Now I see myself. Might you just come by? For 5 minutes. Her plea cracked like fragile glass. He's asked for you. My heart hammered, but not with guilt. I'd spent years proving my worth in boardrooms and bank portals, only to find my name and efforts erased. Now, the memory of that erasure solidified my resolve. I pressed end and placed the phone beside me. I sat for a moment longer, letting the cherry petals swirl in my peripheral vision. I loosened my grip on the wheel, fingers relaxing. The house was a shrine to someone else's dreams, ambitions I'd once hoped to share and had ultimately abandoned. It was time to leave its gravity behind. I turned the key in the ignition. The engine hummed to life, low and steady, a heartbeat I recognized. With gentle purpose, I shifted into drive and rolled forward, leaving the house and the prospect of guilt behind me. The cherry blossoms danced in my rearview mirror as the familiar facade receded. I passed the city limit sign Boise and whispered into the open window. This was always an exit. I just didn't know it. The road ahead stretched toward new possibilities. Startup meetings in Portland, coffee chats with Mrs. Truitt, and open windows in my Eugene loft. I realized then that true reunion wasn't with fading echoes of family tradition, but with the person I had become. And as the sun climbed higher, I felt a quiet exhilaration in knowing that, at last, I was free to go wherever my own story would take me. It wasn't a headline, it was a whisper. But even whispers can echo. I settled into my favorite corner at the local cafe, cradling a steaming latte while the morning rush swirled around me. The aroma of espresso and freshly baked pastries mingled in the air, punctuated by the hiss of the steam wand and soft chatter about weekend plans. I reached for the business newspaper perched on the self-serve rack by the entrance, pretending to scan corporate updates while watching the barista's practiced hands at work. My finger paused as I flipped to the local section, a small article tucked between obituaries and real estate listings. Its title was modest, Madsen Automotive under Financial Review. The first paragraph explained that the state auditor had quietly opened an inquiry into the company's recent loan default and suspected internal irregularities. No bold headlines, no flashy graphics, just sober language outlining a compliance review. An elderly woman slid into the chair beside me, her silver hair neatly pinned and a well-worn purse resting on her lap. She peered over my shoulder at the article. Madsen Automotive, she murmured, voice soft but clear. Shame, really. That girl was the smart one. Her eyes met mine for a moment, compassionate, curious, and then she returned her focus to the page. I offered a polite nod and a small smile, feeling the warmth of relief bubble up. It wasn't victory that stirred in me, but unburdened release. The whisper of that business review confirmed what I'd known in my bones. The quiet action I took months ago had real impact, rippling through dusty boardrooms and high-stakes meetings without fanfare or outrage. My phone buzzed in my bag. I pulled it out, thumb hovering over a call from Rachel. "They'll never expect the fallout to come quietly," she had said back when we filed the complaint. I tapped answer. "Auditors are in," Rachel's voice said, low and steady. "They've started interviewing executives and reviewing documents. No public announcement yet, but they're moving fast." I closed the newspaper and set it aside. "Thank you," I said softly. "That's good." I paused, letting the words settle. "I'm glad they're taking it seriously." Rachel chuckled lightly. "Me too. I'll keep you updated. But for now, it's out of your hands." I looked out the cafe window, where early pedestrians strolled along the sidewalk, oblivious to the corporate tremor beneath their feet. The world felt both vast and intimate, a place where even a quiet filing could stir distant echoes. After I hung up, the barista placed a fresh croissant on my table. I took a bite, savoring the flaky layers and rich butter. A simple pleasure, but one I'd taste more fully now that I wasn't weighed down by silent obligations. I glanced back at the article, committing its modest lines to memory. No screaming banner, no sensationalist claims, just plain fact. It whispered accountability, and that was enough. My phone chimed again. This time, a text from Mom. "He's fading, Aubrey. I think he wants to say something." Just once. I froze, phone in hand, as the cafe's afternoon light shifted through the windows. The echo of her words resonated beneath the whisper of the article. My father's time was coming to a close, and for the first time, I felt the pull of both duty and self-preservation. I closed my eyes, sipping the last of my latte, and let the silence speak for me. I drove onto the quiet hospital campus and paused at the entrance of the palliative care unit, heart pounding in my ears. The antiseptic scent greeted me as I stepped into the corridor, where pale walls and soft overhead lights created an atmosphere of hushed gravity. At the end of the hall, behind partially drawn floral curtains, I found him, my father, Everett Madsen. Frail and diminished, but still undeniably him. He lay in the narrow bed, sheets pulled up to his chest, and 4 drip marking the slow passage of time. He looked smaller than I remembered, not just thinner, but somehow diminished by the years we'd spent apart. I hesitated for a single breath before walking forward and sitting on the chair beside his bed. His eyes, once steely with command, now regarded me with a mix of recognition and something softer, surprise, maybe even relief. For a long moment, we simply held each other's gaze, the only sound the distant beeping of monitors and the low hum of the ventilation system. Then he reached out a trembling hand, and I took it, marveling at the frailty of his grip. He cleared his throat, voice raspy yet earnest. "Aubrey," he said, pausing as if each syllable carried a lifetime of unsaid words. You came back." I offered him a small smile, the kind reserved for moments of fragile reconciliation. "I promised I would," I replied softly. He managed a thin, ironic smile in return. "I didn't think you would." There was no anger in his tone, only regret layered with admiration. I squeezed his hand. "I'm here," I said. "I came back for me as much as for you." His eyes closed briefly, as though he were gathering strength. When they opened again, he spoke with quiet confession. "I built walls to protect our family," he murmured, "but I think I trapped you instead." I felt a wave of empathy wash over me, softening the years of hurt I'd carried. "You did what you thought was best," I said. "But protection shouldn't feel like a prison." He studied my face, his gaze tender and laden with unspoken love. "You did what I never taught you," he admitted, words thick with emotion. "You protected yourself." I let his admission settle between us, tears pricking my eyes. Exhaling slowly, I found my voice gentle yet firm. "I wasn't trying to follow in your footsteps," I whispered. "I was just trying not to disappear." He nodded, as if that truth was all the closure he needed. The room seemed to hold its breath, the late afternoon light filtering through the curtains in soft gold pools. He closed his eyes, and for a moment, I feared he would drift away. But then he squeezed my hand and whispered one word, so quiet I leaned in to hear it. "Visible." I paused at the threshold, letting his final affirmation echo in my mind. It was neither a request for forgiveness nor a grand apology. It was the simple, profound recognition I had longed for. I released his hand and stood, giving him a nod of acceptance. In the hallway, my mother waited, eyes glistening with tears I no longer felt. I offered her a gentle smile and stepped outside into the warm glow of the hospital courtyard, cherry blossoms drifting on a soft breeze. As I walked away, I knew that Everett's last gift to me was this word, visible, guiding me toward my own future, unburdened and fully seen. They called it betrayal. I called it redefinition. The morning air in Seattle felt crisp as I walked into the community conference hall, one of those spaces with recycled wood tables, tangled cords by the stage, and a warm hum of ambition in the air. The event was modest, nothing flashy. Just folding chairs, coffee in compostable cups, and a microphone that occasionally crackled. The kind of place where things were built from scratch, not handed down. My kind of place. I had been invited to speak on the second day of the summit, Quiet Leadership in a Noisy World. I didn't have a company to promote, no flashy pitch deck or brand colors. What I had was a story. And for the first time, I was going to tell it not with names, not with grudges, but with clarity. I stood behind the podium, smoothing a crease in my sleeve as I took a breath. In the front row sat 3 young women. One wore a faded hoodie with a startup logo. Another, a sleek jumpsuit and anxious eyes. The third, barely 20, clutched a notebook, as if truth could be captured on paper if she was quick enough. "Good morning," I began, calm and steady. "My name is Aubrey Morrison. A few years ago, I believed that legacy was something you inherited. That loyalty was something you performed. And that silence was the highest form of gratitude." I paused. No sound, just the occasional stir of a paper cup or shuffle of a bag. I continued, voice unwavering. "I helped build a business I didn't own. I signed loans I wasn't protected from. I worked in silence because I thought that's what good daughters did. What team players did. I was told, we don't hire outsiders, we raise them. But I was never raised, I was used." The slideshow behind me clicked forward, a photo of a dusty conference room chair, an envelope, the blurred logo of a company now under audit. I didn't name them. I didn't need to. A hand went up in the third row. A young woman, brave, nervous, asked, "What if speaking up makes us lose everything?" I smiled, remembering my own question from years ago. "If you lose everything false," I said, "you gain everything that's real. The worst kind of loss isn't losing comfort, it's losing yourself trying to preserve it." I saw Rachel in the back of the room, leaning against a post, arms crossed, her nod nearly imperceptible. She didn't need to say anything. She was part of the arc now. From the folder labeled redemption plan to the withdrawal letter and every quiet click that came after. When I stepped off stage, the applause wasn't thunderous, but it was honest. It came not from awe, but recognition. From people who had been the support beams of someone else's empire and were finally thinking of building their own. Back at my loft in Eugene that evening, the city lights blinked through my window like small, distant affirmations. I kicked off my shoes, set down my bag, and saw the envelope on my desk, white, crisp, with the seal from the bank I once thought would outlast me. I sat down slowly, opened it, and read the simple line, "Your name is no longer listed on the loan agreement." There was no ceremony, no applause, no family to witness the moment. Just me. Just air that felt lighter than it had in years. And in that silence, I realized something profound. A legacy isn't what they leave you. It's what you decide to stop carrying. I folded the letter, tucked it into a drawer that no longer held secrets, and made myself a cup of tea. Then I opened my laptop, not for work, not for worry, but to outline a workshop I'd been asked to lead for first-generation businesswomen. Not to teach them how to fight, but how to not be erased. This time, my name would be at the top. Not as a co-signer, but as author, as architect, as someone who finally redefined what legacy could be. The window is open. For the first time in years, so am I. It was still early, that soft hour before the world rushes in with its noise and its wants. Light filtered through the kitchen window in my loft, washing the countertops in a pale, forgiving gold. I moved slowly, not from weariness, but from the comfort of having nowhere urgent to be. The tea kettle hissed gently. I lit a small candle, not for mood or ritual, but because I liked the way it flickered against the stillness. The folder labeled redemption plan still sat where I'd left it the night before. I picked it up. One last time, not with tension, but with reverence. Inside it now sat only one item. The bank's letter, signed, sealed, stating my full disassociation. My name, once their invisible pillar, had been lifted from the foundation. I placed the letter in a new folder. This one labeled complete. No fanfare. Just closure. I walked to my desk and opened a blank document. The cursor blinked at me, patient and ready. I didn't know exactly what I would write. I only knew it wouldn't be for them. It would be for women like me. Women raised to be functional before they were seen. Daughters groomed to support without question. Partners in silence, rarely in title. At the top of the page, I typed, "You're not difficult. You're just finally visible." And I let the words sit there. Mrs. Truitt knocked once, gently, before letting herself in with her usual, "Hope I'm not catching you mid-brilliance." She carried a small bundle of lavender and a smile that never asked for anything. We spoke about her roses, about the upcoming community book swap, and when she left, she placed a hand on my shoulder, not heavy, just grounding. "It's good to see you settling into your space," she said. I knew she wasn't just talking about square footage. Back at my desk, I closed my laptop for now. There would be time to write. But this moment, this morning, deserved to be lived, not captured. I settled near the window, pulled the chair close, and let my legs rest under the warmth of the early sun. The jazz played low, an old Coltrane record, and the tea steeped in silence. There were no phone buzzes, no unread emails, no crisis. Just breath, steady and mine. In the distance, someone was walking their dog. A child laughed. Somewhere, someone else was starting over too. And I imagined them standing by a window just like mine, realizing they had more choices than they were told. I didn't need to forgive or forget. I didn't need anyone to change for me to find peace. The apology I longed for once, I didn't need it now. What I needed was this: air, light, and the quiet authority of my own name, my own space, my own voice. I leaned back. The candle had burned low. The wind nudged the curtain ever so slightly. And for the first time in years, the sound I heard was my own voice. Uninterrupted. Unafraid. I have been with this story from the very first lines, from the moment the letter appeared, until the last window opened. And if you are still here, reading these lines, perhaps somewhere in your heart you have quietly touched something very familiar. What has haunted me the most throughout the 16-chapter journey is how family affection can be both a support and the deepest pain. There are relationships that do not need screaming to be hurt. They crack in silence, in unspoken words. But it is from there that we learn how to stand up, not to take revenge, but to not be erased from our own lives. Aubrey's story is not uncommon. Have you ever felt forgotten in your own home? That no matter how hard you try, you're still just a backseat in someone else's life? If so, share it in the comments. You're not alone. If this story brings back a memory, a sigh, or a time when you chose to stay silent for love, leave a comment number 1. And if you're watching or reading from somewhere, I'd love to know. Share your province or city in the comments. And if you love light every day, yet profound stories like this, follow or subscribe so you don't miss the next journey. Each follow is a word of encouragement to help me continue telling kind stories. Thank you for listening, for staying until the end. We can't choose where we were born, but we can choose how we continue. And sometimes, just an open window is enough to start over. See you in another story, in another peaceful corner of life.